this project is about, because we have still a couple of days to go in March, and then the project will be officially come to an end. So the problem to some extent with Interreg evaluation is that we have a lot of quantitative indicators. How many people attended a workshop? How many people did you reach with a certain publication or things like that? But what is a black box more or less is, how does a program or a project really contribute to the improvement of the cooperation of partners? And then especially about the question over time, do we see that cross-border networks really improve via Interreg programs? So that you can say in the transport sector, for instance, we have then very stable networks, and they were more or less also established with the help of Interreg. So that was the underlying reason we said that we have really to look into this qualitative aspect. What is the nature of cooperation across the border? And then more the difficult question, how can you measure that, whether now the relations are better than before? We will come into all the details. Fabian and Casper will talk about our methodology and the handbook. That will be the first presentation, and later on I will talk about some results from our pilot application of the methodology that we developed, and we did that here in our Euro region, Meuse-Rhein. You know, we are located in Maastricht item, and we have our colleagues here with us, Fabian Fahl and Professor Martina Fromhold-Eisebeth from Aachen RWTH University. And we have also Professor Roland Willen from Liège University. And we have Tamara Kuhnen from the Euro-region Meuse-Rhein, who was also a partner in this project. So you see, I forgot Casper Kicken. He represents Hasselt University, who was the other partner in the project. So a very strong network of universities together with the Euro region Meuse-Rhein, who we all were working on this project together, which was also, you could say, for us, a very good instrument to improve our cooperation. And we can discuss that. We have also the idea that our cooperation is now better than it has been during the last couple of years. So first, before we start with the results, you can also ask a question if you want in between. That is very often easier than just to say, I will wait for the end. But we have really a lot of time at the end to discuss also the questions of the methodology or questions of the results for the Euro-region Meuse-Rhein that we will present. But first, I would like also to present a bit more the partners in this project. And I will start with Martina Fromhold-Eisebeth, professor at RWTH Aachen. Martina, what was for you the essential of your contribution to this project, and why is it important to measure the quality of cooperation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, hello to everybody, and it's my pleasure also to join this important event. And it's really nice to see that we have this chance to present our results. And referring to your questions, I'm professor of economic geography at RWTH Aachen University. And this means we've always been interested in economic development processes on a regional scale. And there has been a long tradition of doing research on cross-border regional development processes. And we did this on some sustainability issues. We did it on aspects of mobility. And I especially like this approach we did, looking at, well, you can say from a more academic angle to the methodologies, how to measure cross-border collaboration. And we could bring in some expertise on evaluation and some expertise on social empirical research. So this could be contributed to this. And I'm sure we can also learn a lot from the results. So this has been mutually fruitful for the research we are doing anyway, also in my department.
So thanks a lot, Martina. And Fabian Fahl is a PhD candidate from your faculty. He will later present also some results. I will move a bit to the south of Aachen, for those who are not so familiar with our geography, to the city of Liège. Professor Roland Billen is professor there, and his team was also a partner to our project. Roland, what was your inspiration also to join this project? Why was it important?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Well, first of all, I would say that our contribution somehow and our interest is from two sides. The first one is also related to geography. Being part of the geography department, one of my colleagues, Charline Dubois, who was an active worker in this project, she's a human geographer. She was, and she's still very interested in performing surveys and really understand the relationships in this kind of cross-border context. But from the other side, in my group, which is in geomatics, so more technological part of the geography, I've been active in different Interreg projects, and especially in one when I was the PI. And I was very interested to, in one side, contribute to the thoughts about the cross-border collaboration, but also I'm very, very interested to understand better the mechanism of such kind of cross-border collaboration. And so I was really interested right at the beginning, and I was very pleased with the output of the work.
And I know that you have been involved in many Interreg projects, so you also had their inside views on the functioning of more partners and things like that. Mm-hmm. So move to Casper, to Hasselt. And I would like to ask Casper Kicke, who was working with us from Hasselt University, what was your motivation also to work with us?
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, in general, I worked in the Crossquality project on behalf of Hasselt University under the supervision of my promoter, Professor Ali van der Velde, who could not be able to join this meeting, unfortunately, today. But in general, we contributed to the whole project, especially also by looking at conceptualization and methodology of the different assessment methods. In general, one thing I found very interesting to remark is that different conceptualizations and different concepts, understandings of what cross-border cooperation actually is, those really do have implications for the way you are going to measure it, as we will see later on during our presentation. So it is very important to reflect on that well at the different elements throughout the stage of developing assessment methodologies.
Martin, you're still muted.
Martin, you have to switch on your microphone.
I didn't switch it off. Apparently, I had a certain interference. So thanks a lot, Casper. I moved to Tamara, who works for the Euregio Meuse-Rhein, Tamara Kuhnen. What was the motivation of the Euregio to join this project?
Well, of course, it's about our territory. So that was, of course, the main reason. But also, we do a lot of Interreg projects ourselves. And of course, we like to have a look into Interreg programs. So that aspect interested us as well. So we wanted to join the venture as well. And so our main our main work here in this project was about communication. We helped with getting new contacts, with getting new partners, and helping you find people who wanted to ask to answer your questions, and perhaps also getting a bit all of it organized, because we worked with our working themes here at the EMR. My work was also getting your work well packaged. So then we have, for example, a very nice handbook that we can get out into the world. So
yeah,
that's our contribution.
Thank you a lot for that, especially also for the editing. We have sent the handbook to all of you who registered, and there was one comment that there was a problem with the PDF. I think
yes,
we
some
can
of
send
them, 4 or 5 by now. So at the end, now I will get all the email addresses, and I will send to everyone the handbook via WeTransfer. I hope that will change it so that people can open it.
Okay, very good. But as you said, one important feature of this project was to get in contact with experts in the field, because that was our main issue, to bring to talk to many people, experts who dealt with Interreg projects, in order to find out how they assess also the quality of their cooperation with the colleagues across the border. And so we will come to also what we really did and the results, developing a methodology for assessing the quality of cross-border cooperation. And there is also a research background. That's why you will find the handbook, but also a research report where we also describe the academic background. And I would like to ask now Casper, I think, who will start with presenting what was the background with respect to the academic field, our research, and then Fabian will also present our actual handbook that we sent out to you. Please, Casper.
So thank you, Martin. So in the next, let's say 15 minutes, Fabian Vaal and I, Casper Kikken, we will present to you some more background information about the methodology of the assessment methodology we developed in the course of this Interreg project. What is very important to know at the start of this presentation is that, of course, within the project there will be, let's say, 3 main deliverables, so the handbook, the research report, and the final report. And in this presentation, we will especially focus on the handbook and the research report. So the handbook will contain everything that is necessary to know when you want to replicate the methodology in the future. The research report, as such, gives all the necessary scientific background of that handbook. So how did concepts develop itself, and how did we find different indicators? About the methodology behind the handbook. Our so-called research report contains all the scientific background, as I said. But then the question is, of course, what is exactly cross-border cooperation? That was the first question we need to think about well before we were able to come up with a methodology. Well, as you can see on this PowerPoint slide, our main research questions at the beginning of the project were about cross-border cooperation, and especially how can we measure the quality of cross-border cooperation networks? Do those cross-border programs and projects foster the development of cooperation? And finally, do those Interreg funding, does it produce valuable networks? So what I italicized here are the words networks, cooperation. Why did I do that? Because we think that those elements are really necessary for defining cross-border cooperation as such. And if you look at different definitions within literature on what cross-border cooperation is, it is exactly that network element that is often mentioned. as we can see within this definition, for example, we didn't just pick one single definition on which we built the whole methodology, but we tried to look at multiple approaches and definitions for defining cross-border cooperation. However, I think this definition particularly explains well what we have done. I will read it to you. It's developed by the European Commission itself. European cross-border cooperation aims to tackle common challenges identified jointly in the border regions and to exploit the untapped growth potential in border areas while enhancing the cooperation process for the purposes of the overall harmonious development of the Union. So again, I italicized enhancing the cooperation process. How is cross-border cooperation assessed within literature? There are multiple methods which I know you are all very familiar with. Of course, you have the existing indicator systems that are built by the Interreg programs themselves. And you also have different methods of territorial impact assessment. You have different kinds of territorial impact assessment. Some focus rather on effects, others focus also on rather the input and the throughput of the cooperation processes. But what we really saw when doing our literature review, we thought current assessment methodology focuses a lot on quantitative indicators. They focus on output and maybe less on the processes themselves. Well, over the last 4 minutes, I explained that those processes are very important, of course, for understanding cross-border cooperation. And that's exactly why we decided to come up with in our own methodology to create a measurement instrument focusing on these elements. It focuses on cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. And in order to do so, we created different indicators, which we divided within so-called harder indicators and softer indicators. I will not go to all those indicators right now, but it is important to know that those indicators are all based on cooperation processes as such. But at the same time, those hard indicators, they focus rather on the institutionalized characteristics of those cooperation processes, while soft indicators, on the other hand, they rather focus on interactions, on personal relationships, group relationships, also the roles that develop within groups, and how that does impact the cooperation process. Well, how did we then develop? How did we translate those concepts and those indicators within the methodology? First of all, we make use of self-created sectors, because you will always see within Interreg programs that you have multiple projects, but you have to relate them to each other one way or another. And in order to do that, we divided the different projects into sectors, and you can then analyze those sectors. We did about these self-created sectors. Fabian will later on talk more when he discusses the expert workshops. When it comes to the measurement instruments, so how are we going to collect data to assess cooperation processes? We have 3 measurement instruments. We have the individual interviews, the sectoral expert workshops, and the online survey. And Fabian will now come to the practical details of these 3 measurement instruments while explaining the handbook.
Yes, thank you very much, Casper. The handbook is a practical guidance document, and it's on how to assess the quality of cross-border cooperation, as Casper mentioned before. So it's can be used for practitioners to gain deeper insights into cross-border cooperation in Interreg EMR or even other Interreg territories, because it's possible to make our investigation in the future for our region or at any time in other Interreg territories, also to compare the results of cross-border cooperation. Next slide, please. The first pillar from our investigation were the expert interviews. Each interview took 30 to 60 minutes, depends on the expert. and was held between one from the Interreg cross-quality team and one expert with experience in cross-border cooperation, especially in Interreg projects. This had several benefits. One benefit was that it was possible to hold the interviews in the own language, because we have 3 different languages, or maybe 4 if you count English. This was a clear benefit of our investigation, and it was possible to go deeper into single projects. So that means the expert can talk about many details, which is not possible in the workshops, and also to talk about the experience with other partners, project partners from Interreg projects. And there were also experts without Interreg experience, but with a good overview about cross-border cooperation in our region or in other regions. So we had additional interviews with experts outside of Interreg. Questions that we asked were, for example, would you start more cross-border projects because of your experience? This was a good first question to get in touch with the success of this single project. And did your network become more diverse? Is a good question to related to the expanding of the cross-border network from Interreg. And we have had, of course, different questions about details, like how did you handle different languages among the project partners? Because for few participants in the same project, everything was good, and for other, maybe, I don't know, English was not the best way to deal. So we had different opinions from the same projects. This was a very important result from the interviews. Next slide, please. So the second pillar from our investigation were the workshops. The duration was something around 1 hour and 45 minutes. And on each workshop, participants from one sector try to answer our questions. Sectors, we are not going deeper into details here, but we created our own sectors like research and innovation or health and well-being, because the experts are talking in the same sectoral language as we wanted to say here. And it was possible to go broader into a sectoral network with, of course, partners from the same sector, because we wanted to know where are the differences between the sectors, but also to see what's where the projects are related to each other and how stable are the networks into a sector. And this is why we choose workshops as an instrument here. Questions were like, how would you assess the quality of preparation in your Interreg project? It was good to compare the success in different projects from the same sector. And a very good question was on the end of our workshop is, what is your experience with administrative aspects of the Interreg program? This is a question of broad debates started around aspects of like payment on time, regulations, reporting obligations, and other forms of administration. And this had a clear influence to the success of cross-border cooperation. Next slide, please. The last pillar from our investigation was the survey, because we had only qualitative results from the former 2 things I mentioned. And we wanted to know, is this also quantitatively verifiable? So we used a survey with Qualtrics, and with the support from Interreg and the regional antennas, we were able to get in touch with many experts, and we asked the same questions from the interviews and workshops, of course. And so we had a qualitative investigation and a quantitative investigation about the quality of cross-border cooperation. Yeah. And I think in the next part, Martin will tell us something about the results. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to share them with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabian. But if there are already questions, I think we can take them now on board about the methodology. To some extent, you have seen that we have developed our own indicators, and it was about questions like what was the information about? Was there a good consultation with the partners? Was it possible to have a sort of conflict solving mechanism? What about your joint objectives for the time without Interreg funding? So there was a degradation of different questions, more or less, from easy things of cooperation like information sharing up to higher, you could say, higher forms in order to find really your own objectives for even services that you will finance in the future together without Interreg contribution. And you have seen we have there chosen different sectors where we more or less looked into these different aspects of cooperation. If you now switch, I think you have to stop, Casper, now to, yeah, then I will show my slides. Pim and me, we are the lead in writing a final report for the first pilot application of this methodology, because that was done in our own region, Euregio-Meuse-Rhein, or the Interreg, I have to be correct, the Interreg program, Euregio-Meuse-Rhein. So, yeah. To come back to our, the main results, we have 3 different products, you could say. Again, the handbook, and that is for all practitioners in the future. You can have a look into the handbook and also say, if you would like to know more about the quality of cooperation within your Interreg program, that you can also then use our methodology. The research report we mentioned already, and then we will have a final report on results from our pilot application. Can't switch it now. Ah, yeah, okay. So, and we looked into the Interreg program Euregio-Meuse-Rhein. At the time, it was still called Interreg program Euregio-Meuse-Rhein. It is, I think, for the next period, it's called Meuse-Rhein only without Euregio. And there is also a reason behind that. On the left-hand side, you see our Euro region, Meuse-Rhein. And it is more or less, you could say, the same territory as the territory of the Interreg program. And it is very particular that you have only one Euro region with an own Interreg program, but it is not completely the same territory. So that's why it's also sometimes confusing. And also Interreg as such is, of course, a very different organization than our Euro region. And because the name was so close, there were sometimes also there was a bit confusion. We sometimes also noticed that even with our experts who dealt with Interreg, that there was sometimes a confusion with the organization of our Euro region and the organization of Interreg. So that will be hopefully better with also the change in the name in the future. Now, what did we do? We said already, also with our program, we saw that there were only little or hardly any qualitative indicators where you could say, yes, there we know more about the quality of cooperation. What else? It is interesting that the program, Interreg program, because also of the territory, is very much characterized by the structures of this Euro region. The Euro region is established as an European grouping of territorial cooperation. So also you have a very strong governance structure coming from the Euro region, and that has also an impact on the Interreg program that is happening exactly in this territory, that's clear. So also the formalization, the institutionalization of this cross-border Euro region is very decisive. Now that means also the networks. There are some working groups established by the Euro region, so you can also expect that there is an overlap between networks coming from Interreg or having to do with Interreg projects and with the pure, you could say, Euro region networks, which is also the case. What else? And that's the most important probably in comparison to other cross-border territories. We have here 3 member states, 3 languages, you could say 5 administrative cultures if you say that also the 3 Belgian partner regions who are involved have their own, to some extent, also administrative culture. So a highly complex cross-border situation. We talked already about the different sectors, and we made there a choice. We looked into sectors that were very interesting from a network point of view, that we said yes, and there we see really also active networks, meaning there is not only one small Interreg project, but that is really a cluster. And we said, yeah, we focus on public transport, health, emergency services, climate, energy, so innovation in climate and energy, then the education sector and the labor market business development sector. And that makes it also easier if you say, yes, there we define also a certain network structure, and we search also for experts in this particular field. Starting with public transport. So coming to the results, we had many individual expert interviews. We had an expert workshop, and we had also then a survey where also, that's our guests, people from the transport sector filled in our questionnaire. The very particular thing in the transport sector in our Euro region is that there is one very big Interreg project where you could say there are all the partners who are dealing with public transport are joining under one roof of this big project. And the very typical thing and very essential is that there is a coordination body for cross-border public transport that is funded without Interreg money. So there is a stable network that is already there. And on top of that, they can also get extra money from Interreg, and then they can increase their cooperation. And that is a decisive element. We have seen that whether you have a stable networks that are also existing outside Interreg or not. In this sector, we saw there is a big willingness of all the partners to have also in the future joint services maintained without Interreg money. So the idea there was a big project also with respect to e-ticketing and other aspects of public transport. And it was clear there is enough trust also in this network to say we do that also for the future. There will be not a stop and go situation after the ending of the financing from the Interreg program. A very particular situation where you have a rather stable network that is willing also to go beyond the pure Interreg financing. And we had then, we tried out different questions. And this is, for instance, a very interesting one because it's so positive. The assessment regarding cross-border cooperation in general in your sector today in comparison to the period before this programming period. And then you see that not only aspects like your integration of your network into the overall public transport network in the Euregio Meuse-Rhein is very positive with 3.9, that it's regarded better than it used to be, but also the possibility of joining public services after the end of the Interreg period, that's the last one, is very positively assessed, because we did not see that so much in other policy sectors, that people said, yes, we are ready also to finance services after the end of the period. And this is to some extent a bit exemption to the rule, the public transport sector, where we also see that the partners are going beyond Interreg. Very different, for instance, in the sector of education. We also had there a lot of individual expert interviews and then also an expert workshop. We had there 9 projects and some of them focusing on school cooperation. And we saw in this sector that we had more or less a lot of school projects already in the past, but there we saw a lot of stop and go. We had many projects about traineeships, school exchange, or neighboring languages, but there was still no permanent cooperation body beyond the scope of the single Interreg projects. So there was already the impression also outlined by the participants of the workshop. Yes, we have a sort of unfortunate stop and go situation where we go from one project to another, and very often losing the stable networks after the end of a project period. So there we saw the results were more negative than in the transport sector. So a lack of such a stable cross-border coordination body, frustration about stop and go, because there is also a lot of loss for resources. You have these home pages who are not updated any longer after the end of a project and things like that. The cooperation is still perceived as very useful. Interreg is seen as very positive with respect to exchanging information, communication, and things like that. But to some extent, stop and go is there a big problem. And there, I will not go very much into the detail of administrative problems, but this was a sector where the debate on the efforts, the administrative tasks were very, very big. The debate that sometimes the administrative burden is jeopardizing the real work that you would like to do together. So we can spend a lot of time on just talking about administrative aspects, but that's not the purpose for today. But we saw that in all the sectors that can be really tricky for also the quality of cooperation, if also people are a bit overwhelmed by their administrative tasks. And there you see also, if you look into then single questions about the situation and the quality, whether they see now negative or positive effects during this period, you see this is very modest. So to some extent, stability of the organizational setup, for instance, is very modest. So the numbers here are much lower than in the transport sector. So it is a bit also behind that the frustration that the network as such is not more stable than it has been in the past. Now we come to the sector climate, energy, innovation. We have a lot of innovation projects in our program, as you see in many Interreg programs. There you have a very particular situation, which is different from the transport and the education sector. There is no major cross-border network. You could say we have a lot of many smaller projects and very detailed, focused on one particular thing. I have this road there that was from a rolling solar project where you see that was about the development of photovoltaic systems, very particular. A very particular thing. There is not so much cooperation without Interreg in this sector, and that has also to do with this very detailed projects. We had 6 projects related to energy transition and climate innovation, and you could say these network structures can be described as heterogenic. They are temporary and small scale. And now the interesting thing is that this is not a problem for the sector in this case, because you have there, for instance, also many universities and research institutes who join there, and they are very much used to this short-term project-based approach. They emphasized, for instance, that the cooperation quality was very good. There are the results. Personal contacts, coping with different languages, no problem at all in this sector. That has, for instance, to do with English, that also for academics, people in the research field doing such a project together in English is not a problem because they are used to that from other research projects. Coping with cultural attitudes was no problem. Trust in the network, neither. So a very, very positive result for the quality of the cooperation. And you can explain that, as I said, academic partners, they are used to that, to find this common understanding in such a project structure. It was also interesting that participants of the workshop, they said that it's not so much the cultural or the language problem. Normally you would expect if you have 3 languages in a cross-border region, that is a problem. They more or less emphasize it could be more interesting that you have another institutional culture. If, for instance, a university works together with a municipality or with an SME, that is a cultural difference that apparently in this sector is more interesting than the question whether you are in the Walloon region or in the Aachen region. So stop and go is also there not seen as a problem, but that our explanation is, yes, this is normal for the academic world. You search for partners for a 2 or 3 year period, and that is not the idea that you have a stable network that lasts forever. So very interesting results, and you see that also the estimates for what was the impact of the Interreg program on the quality of your cooperation over time were also very, very positive in this field. So the partners had there a positive view on the impact. Now, again, different in the field of labor market and business development, where we see a bit both. We have the rather stable networks in the sector of business development. For many, many years, there were different projects in the field. On the other hand, you had a rather new established networks in the field of cross-border employment services or information services across the border for employers and employees. So this is also very decisive whether you had already stable structures or whether the Interreg project is more or less a vehicle to improve a network situation. The quality of cross-border cooperation was seen a bit less positive than in other sectors. And that has also a bit to do with the frustration also of the people who are dealing with that for a longer time. There were many experts dealing with that for 10 or 15 years. And if you look here, what is your assessment with respect to the development of cross-border cooperation in your sector over time? From no improvement to very strong positive improvement, that is more or less in the middle. So also a bit modest to say, yes, we do not really see a major improvement over time with respect to the cooperation in our sector. And as I said, a lot of people were experts who were for a longer time in the field. They were a bit frustrated about stop and go. They, for instance, emphasized the question, why is it always so short? Why do we not have a funding period that lasts, for instance, for 5 to 7 years? Because they said you need more time to establish then also these stable structures that will survive the Interreg project. And they also questions more the need for innovation, because in their field, it is not that you always have to invent a wheel for the cooperation in the field of business development. They said it would be more helpful to be able to invest in solid structural cross-border cooperation and not always to come with a new innovative idea for this type of cooperation. That was also very, very interesting coming from people who have a lot of experience with different projects. So they had the idea that this less short-term approach would be in particular interesting also for companies, because they see for the field that there is less interest in short-term cross-border projects where you also estimate that the chances after the end of the project that there is still something happening is not that big. Now, that was the last one we did, the health and emergency services sector, which is in our Euro region a very decisive one, you could say, in comparison to other Euro regions. Very good cooperation across the border because we have two very stable networks in the field of emergency services and health prevention who exist also outside Interreg. And in this field, we saw that in particular that the participants who were not involved in such a stable network structure had another perspective than people who have access to these stable networks. That was certainly a case there. And there it was also interesting, the cooperation from many experts is seen as very good, but also outside Interreg. So because there are very stable network structures also outside the Interreg field, also the estimate of was there a big improvement or very strong positive improvement because of Interreg was also a bit more modest. That does not say that the cooperation is not, in this case, I would say even better than in other fields, but the influence of Interreg was seen as more modest because it was clear even without Interreg funding, there is a network and they are also cooperating without extra funds from Interreg. Yeah, there was, and in this case, it's also interesting that in the past, Interreg projects have led to the establishment of these two excellent networks. So to some extent, we saw this is also an exemption to the rule that you have from the past stronger networks who are really established by Interreg and can survive and have their own life and benefit then also and benefiting for the cross-border situation also even without Interreg funding. As I said, big difference between people who have access to such a network than people who are more or less just joining one project without a stable network. It was there all interesting that we saw that management skills are also seen as essential. So how to run an Interreg project is not so easy, and you have more or less to learn it. It is not that you just start as a project leader and you know exactly how to do it. We will come to that later in the recommendations. Interreg projects require already in the first place a certain degree of good cooperation of the partners, meaning that searching for the right partner is very, very essential. And there we saw also some difficulties that sometimes too many partners or the wrong partners are perhaps together in a project. So the selection of partners is key for the quality of cooperation. Yeah, what we can then also conclude for the Euregio-Meuse-Rhein, the program Euregio-Meuse-Rhein, in overall, we can be rather positive. The influence of Interreg is assessed as a very important factor for the development of cross-border cooperation. Very often it's seen as a very positive element to improve cooperation and network structures. And these network structures, as we see from the emergency field and the health sector, are key for a sustainable cooperation. Because otherwise, we saw that you are faced with a stop-and-go situation. That was very much described as a problem in some of the sectors. Networks do not survive single projects, and then you have more or less the one stops, the other starts, but without the synergies from the recent projects. And as I said, project management skills are decisive for the quality. Whether information cooperation, consultation across the border is better or not, that has a lot to do also with project leaders, with the lead partner, whether they have the skills or not also to bring people together and do that in a very good way. The time frame was criticized very often, as I already mentioned, too short very often for establishing sustainable structures. And if that is the case, very often it has also to do with not enough investment in the project design, and especially also with the question, who are the right partners for your project? Because the network later is only stable if there is a very good match of the project partners. Sometimes the objectives are not so clear right from the start. Sometimes you have too many partners, that what we also saw in some of the projects. Sometimes you have a sort of political intervention that the program says you could also have another partner from this region. That would be good. And there we saw also problems that you have then too many partners on board. Some lack then more or less the obligation, the vision of the others, and then you are in a situation where also the network is probably weaker than you expected it to be. It's very astonishing. In our Euro region with 3 languages, cultural or language problems are not seen as a big network problem. They are to some extent mentioned, but we saw that this is not a decisive factor whether projects are not stable or whether networks are not established afterwards. Perhaps it's sometimes more the institutional culture of the different partners that do not really match. And you can see that, of course, a municipality is a totally different machine than a university or a small and medium enterprise. And working there together is sometimes more difficult than across the borders. And what we said, more partners is not always good. Probably it's even better to have a small number of partners in Interreg projects. That makes life to some extent easier, and it is more likely that the match is bigger between partners. We mentioned it, administrative burden. We saw a lot of, or we heard a lot of comments from experts who said some of the institutions will not join another Interreg project because of the administrative burden. And that is, of course, very, very negative if you see that Interreg will even lead to the unwillingness to work together with partners across the border, because people say, no, Interreg, that's burdensome, and we will not be involved in the future. But that was, as I said, not the core of our project, but it's interesting to keep that in mind if you hear experts saying that. It is certainly good also with respect to the new programming period to think about simplification, about lump sum approaches and things like that to make life easier. Now, finalizing and concluding with some of our recommendations. In the first place, you can also say sustainable cross-border networks, that should be an essential objective of an Interreg program, and perhaps that is not so much seen in practice, also not by the experts. So what should be also one of the main focuses is that after the end of a project that you say, yes, that should be really also an objective to say in this sector, there should be a network without Interreg funding who is also has an obligation to work together on a joint service. And that should be right from the start a bit more clearer. And I think that can be also supported, for instance, by also the idea of what are the right partners, what is the right number of partners in a project, and to some extent also to say it's not always good if you have partners from all the regions, from all different sectors, or that you say it's better probably to keep it simple sometimes and to have a smaller number of partners who have a good match. There should be also more thinking about how to overcome the stop and go phenomenon. And that has to do with, the idea, could it be not the case that you reconsider the innovation aspect, that you say it should be always a very new thing? Is it not also good, as we saw in the field of business development, labor market, that you say, yes, they don't have to invent a new way to cooperate. It would be good to have a stable situation with respect to the things they do already. They started years ago, that you can also build up on the cooperation they have in the sector and not say we have a very, very new splendid idea that we will develop now. And that has also to do with short periods, longer periods. There was the idea that if you have shorter periods for the projects, it's also difficult then to have more a stable situation afterwards. And then finally, also with respect to the administration of Interreg and the participation, it requires a specific Interreg know-how, you could say. That's why we saw also in our evaluation that you have strong Interreg experts who are dealing with Interreg projects for the last 10, 15 years. And we know also why, because they have the know-how. And you need this know-how also to develop good projects and to later on also cope with the administrative burden that you have with Interreg. So there could be a bit more emphasis on proactive assistance. So more coaching, for instance, that people really understand what is project management, what is the role. Even you could think about platforms where the projects can exchange their files and communicate, things that just assist the functioning of a project. Otherwise, it's always monitoring. The Secretariat is seen as a body that is always monitoring your project and is complaining about information requirements and things like that. It would be also a good spirit to say there is more coaching also from the side of the Interreg program towards the project partners in order to cope with also all the different things you have to know. So in a nutshell, those were the findings and our recommendations. And this is not, I think, things that you haven't heard. I mean, we know about the administrative questions and about stop and go, but I think it's interesting to see that also now with one particular Interreg program where we really went into the details of the different aspects of cooperation. And now I would like to open the floor, I think, to all of you and ask questions about our experiences in developing the methodology in the first place, but then also applying it to our Euro region. Please, the floor is yours. Otherwise, to break the ice, I could also ask Pim. Pim, you were responsible for the survey. And what was, again, what if you, more or less, it was very often a confirmation, was my idea, what we got in the survey, what we got from the individual expert interviews and from the workshops.
True. Yeah. So the survey, we decided not per sector. That was not possible, but we could filter on experience. So whether the respondent has experience with Interreg, Eurasian-Rhine, other cross-border projects or other Interreg projects. So there we could see, okay, are there any differences between participants who joined in Interreg, Eurasian-Rhine, as well as in other Interreg programs or other cross-border projects funded otherwise, such as Horizon Europe. There we see actually the respondents, the answers were pretty similar and were indeed a confirmation of the findings of the expert workshops and the interviews. So they indeed saw that Interreg is a very important factor in the total development of cross-border cooperation. So it is highly valuable for getting new contacts within the same sector, but also outside sector. But indeed, they also raised the administrative aspects, and it was our conclusion that the full potential of Interreg as a facilitator of high-quality cross-border cooperation is still not fully deployed or fully met yet, because indeed you see that a lot of time is consumed by the administration and not by working together on the same goal. What I also would like to emphasize is that they often mentioned like having the shared objective, having a shared aim and goal, that is decisive for good cooperation and a good network. So that should be priority number one, and not per se the product or the outcome, but more like having a shared vision. and creating their vision.
And also perhaps, do you have a vision for a joint activity after the programming period? Because that, if you talk about stop and go, the stop is then very often that people say, yeah, that's now the funding is over. So also our cooperation stops at this point because we do not have anything what we would like to do together without Interreg funding. I mean, that will be not the case in our consortium, Roland. We will, of course, look into our cooperation. What can we do together also without this project? But it is for many, many projects a very crucial element that also the network structure is lost after the end of the project. So, other comments or questions? Also vis-a-vis our experience, for instance, I mean, it is always the question how to contact experts. Fabian, in your case, I think it was sometimes not so difficult. People are ready to organize an interview. They were also ready to join a workshop. That was not so much the problem. Or what was your experience?
Yes, you're right. Maybe the reason is that we had many participants in Germany, in the Aachen region. I could imagine that we have just more potential participants for workshops and interviews. But yes, the number of positive responses were very high. I was very happy about that, and we had very interesting interviews and also workshops from partners from Aachen.
Yeah. And there was also sometimes the idea that people like to talk about these aspects because they were never asked what was the quality of the cooperation with your partners across the border. So they were rather pleased to talk about that and also to join their experiences. Yeah.
There's a kind of feedback from Interreg would be another option for upcoming periods, maybe.
Yeah. And we saw also, I mean, you have a certain bias, of course, because you talk really to experts. And it's clear that people who have many years of Interreg expertise are willing to join such a workshop because they like to talk about their experiences. So it's more tricky to get people who are still newcomers in the field. Sometimes we had also, I think, colleagues who just joined one Interreg project and they could then also refer to their experience, which was good because the people who are the old, you could say, the old experts, they saw it all and they know everything inside out. So that's also then to some extent, yeah, not a problem, but clear they have their vision on Interreg. So, Roland, please. Oh, there was Roland, perhaps first Svetlana.
Okay, yeah, I'm
yeah.
gonna be very, very quick. No, I was just wanted to, when you mentioned that for people who have some experience in Interreg project, it's nice to be able to talk about it. And it's true that I remember that just at the beginning of my first Interreg experience, I've been asked to fill in a survey, and it was very difficult because it was only, I think, 1 month that we were in after the launch, the kickoff of my first project. So I think it's very important that we have feedback. And I just wanted to say that I think that this project, our project, really it's a nice and good opportunity to go a step further in order to make this such kind of Interreg collaboration, just trying to improve them. And I think that I would say my personal comment on the conclusion of our work is that some of the things we have identified, I had that in mind. I mean, considering my own experience, but it's always nice to see that it's shared by other people and you are not alone. And sometimes you may, some of your difficulties could be just related to you or to your project, but you can see that there are some, so the good and the bad things are shared. It's very good. But I really think that in the recommendation really will help the Interreg program to go a step further. And well, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to tell again about the conclusion you just made, but I think I was really pleased with the conclusion of the project and the recommendation, which I think it's not just a matter of telling something that is kind of trivial that everybody knew before. I mean, we did put into in the light some of the things that was known, but I think that we came also with some very interesting recommendation for the future. That's it. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Roland. Svetlana, please.
Good afternoon. Greetings from the tri-border, Austria, Italy, and Slovenia. I would like to take a moment to thank you for an excellent presentation. We also felt that the feedback that you have provided specifically based on the empirical data from the participants of the cross-border projects really broke a lot of possible stereotypes for people who have not experienced that type of cross-border cooperation in the multilingual regions. I think we could relate to this also, considering the multilingualism, the aspect that you have listed that language was not an issue, but actually structural aspects of collaborations were an issue. Then secondly, thank you very much for very critical and transparent view based on the data coming from interviews and surveys, because coming from the partners, this is really essential. There's quite a few aspects that are related to challenges of building cross-border cooperation, and a lot of institutions tried to build handbooks for cross-border cooperations. We're also a member of Time Network, and in few of the assemblies and the final assembly in January, there was a discussion that we exactly missed this information about assessment of the sustainability of those projects after the funding is over. Right, so we are very grateful. And another comment is that our students from Villach, from the Fachhochschule Kärnten, are also very excited to learn and study and to research that aspects of sustainability of the cross-border cooperation projects, because they come from the cross-border regions and they would like to use handbooks like this in your research to build on this, to work better in other cross-border regions. So really, thank you very much for everything that you're doing, and we're looking forward to reading more on the insights from your handbook, and thank you for staying critical and helping us keep inspired and even though there are quite a few challenges ahead of us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Svetlana. And of course, the students can use our handbook and start tomorrow with applying it to your cross-border situation. That would be great. Other comments or remarks? No. Everything was clear then, apparently. I saw that we also had Daniela.
Okay.
Please.
Hello. Also from my side, thank you for this very good and interesting presentation. We are working for Interreg. Some of my colleagues are here also to listen today. And yeah, I have to say the results you brought are very interesting, and I'm looking forward to discuss this also with more Interreg programs, as discussed with Martin Unfried already. And I'm looking forward to hear also what other Interreg programs will, what feedback they will give us, and to see if the situation which you have with one Interreg program applies also to more. So thank you very much for this interesting presentation, and I'm looking forward to further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, and we are looking forward to the cooperation with you, with Interreg, also in your next workshop. And in May, I think there will be then a week in Brussels with different, or a conference, a couple of days.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have one online event on the 29th of March, and then in May, a physical event. So looking forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Very good. So I can't see any remark, famous last words. If not, then I would like to thank you all, my colleagues from Crossquality and all of you participants in this workshop. I hope it was useful for you. Thank you very much. And perhaps we see each other again on the topic in one of the workshops of Interact, or in the future. I think we do not stop with also disseminating the results of our work, so there will be certainly a follow-up. And for those who are from the region, we will have also then still our closure. That will be on the 16th of March, as far as I know, in Maastricht, at Maastricht University. So there was already a mailing invitation, but if you want to join, please contact us. You can still join our closure event. So we have also to thank, of course, the Interreg program Uricho-Meuse-Rhein, because this was made possible also by the funding of Interreg. So thank you also from the people from the Secretariat. Thank you all, and see you next time, perhaps also with our series next item. Thank you very much.